we've talked a lot about the business of games. We've talked a lot about strategy. We've talked a lot about, how do we use the tools. What we're going to do now is just talk about when are we done? When is a game done? And I made a quote earlier on what Tim Schafer said about games being done when they leave the designer's cold, dead hands. But we're going to try and see and go into a little bit more detail on that. Let's start off, though. Sorry, do you want to explain who you are and what you do?
Sure. My name is Zaair Hussain. I work with Frag Games. We do a lot of external development and have started doing some of our own IPs.
My name is Sonja Angesleva. I work for Zynga as product and analytics lead, working on the next Farmville game.
I'm Patrick McGrath. I'm a product lead for June's Journey at Wooga, based in Berlin.
I probably should explain that I do have a job, most of which is helping game developers make games. But there are games like you may have seen the game Reality Clash talked about. I was the designer on that. You may have heard on the PlayStation there used to be a virtual world called PlayStation Home. I was home architect for PlayStation Home, and I've also run the mobile operator 3 in the Java game days. We were the most successful in terms of revenue per user in the world. So I have a little experience running games as a service. I even wrote the book. Literally, you can go and do a search on the book, Games as a Service, you'll find my book. Okay, so let's go back to that Tim Schafer quote. So games are only done when they leave the designers. Is that your experience? I mean, what do you think is done for you?
It honestly depends a lot on the game. I don't think games are done when they leave a designer's hands at all, right? Like, certainly that's not what the designer would have wanted, even posthumously. So, it really depends. Are you talking about the business of games or the kind of platonic ideal of games? Because the platonic ideal of games is never done, just like any piece of art.
And
with apologies to Roger Ebert.
Exactly, and every encounter with the player, each new player is adding something of life to that concept.
They're interacting in it in their own way. Like, especially with competitive games, if you have them, think about metagames.
This is sounding like art. You're saying that games is art, aren't you?
I think games is partly art. I think a lot of what, like I was saying, especially for multiplayer games, where there's this competition and there's meta, often the designers are not the people who are best at the game. Often they don't know where it's going to go, right? Like if you look at the metas for things like Dota or Hearthstone or anything like that, the player base, the player community hugely influences the path of the game.
Well, it stops being the developers, it starts being the players. Sonja, does that resonate with you? So is it depends with you, or is there a more... You're good at definitive answers. Go on, I know that.
Yeah, so... I could go with I agree with you. But then again, all the developers define, when the game is done for release. Of course, like, if you are doing well, the players are, keep on playing the game, and most likely they will run out of content. You need to create more content, but that doesn't mean that, the game wasn't done. The game was done, but now you can extend the experience.
So I think the game is ready.
Oh, sorry, Patrick, you were saying?
I was just saying, instead of done, the game is ready.
Yeah. I think that's probably good. The thing in my head there is, what's really fascinating about that is that it's actually, if we don't have stop points, we don't know what we're doing. Is that fair?
Yes, well, it is, yeah. You need to have milestones, you need to have criteria, when to continue and when to, redo and when to stop, so... It's about, Yeah,
I think all game development is all about validation, constant validation, and with these milestones that Sonja's talking about, these are the kind of, do we continue making this game, or do we stop? Like, do players love it? Do we love it? Is there a business case for it? Like, all these questions that you need to evaluate, each game.
So we've gone from games as art to games as a hypothesis, essentially. No. So, I mean, actually, let's see that. So let's think about, in terms of where different genres affect this kind of decision-making process, different kinds of games. Is there anything kind of like you can say that you feel like indicates the games that you've worked on and the way they're different and what done means or ready means for that? Do you want to start with?
Yeah, without getting into the specifics of the games, and by the way, just to respond to you guys, I think I totally agree. There's no such thing as done, but there is done enough.
Yeah.
There is a point at which you have to make that decision and be like, you know what, this is it. And sometimes it breaks your heart, and then you're like,
it's the line "perfect is the enemy of done," which I think is a fantastic phrase. Yeah.
Right. So there are just some games, there's some genres which work very well with games as a service. In fact, I don't think they would exist without that, like CCG we're working on. What is a CCG without content updates, right? Or even a LCG, a living card game. What would Hearthstone be if the last thing that ever happened to it was just the classic set, right? How does, would Dota 2 be, like to take a less extreme example, would Dota 2 be the same game? Were it not for the 50 heroes added in the last 2 years? Probably not. And on the other side of that spectrum is like, it would Inside be improved by being a service? Probably not, right? Like, would Braid be improved by being a service? So I think it's just like understanding what genres it works with and making that decision during the design of the game.
But I would say that there is certainly a trend, and you see this in console the last couple of years, like even starting out with like Warframe, and now Fortnite is such, like the classic example now is a console game being ran as a live service, live ops updates. I mean, they just ran their big blackout campaign. I think this is a trend that even in the old kind of console where, this kind of idea of done, and let's move on and make another game, idea kind of stems from, you're starting to see games as a service and live ops kind of inch its way into these kind of areas of gaming.
And I also wonder if it's a decision, if it's a, I think we have had a history of, physical product that requires a done because you can't distribute it. And now we're in a situation where we're realizing that we have a digital first concept. A game is a digital thing, and therefore there is no need to necessarily have a finite end to it. And so I'm not so sure it's a genre thing. I think it's a design choice. Sonja, what do you think?
Yeah, well, I was going to give an example of game jams. I'm sure like some of you or many of you have joined game jams. So I think game jam is a great example, as you have only like limited amount of time, and basically, at the end of the weekend, you might never see the team members again. So you basically have to be very, that clearly is like sort of done, but that's also a nice way to start. You can basically, try out things. Like there are a lot of great games that have actually started as a game jam project, and it was done, but then, it just got a new life.
And I think that's an interesting thing. It's like, you can start out with the process of thinking, okay, this is an experience which we will continue to maintain and adapt over time. Or you can say, I have this vision of a experience, and it may be a one-time experience, but then even like a novel, you want to live in that world again. And so whether it's a sequel or whether it's episodic or whatever, I think the idea of done, even in traditional media, isn't necessarily done. Is that fair?
Are you talking about reboots?
Well, maybe.
Did you see RoboCop?
Exactly.
I'm just gonna say.
Oh, fair enough. Yeah. Someone was talking about doing The Princess Bride again.
Oh no.
Seriously, no. Okay, so maybe that's what. So let's go back then. So in that case, actually, I'm going to challenge you that actually, what if done is more important? What if we're not giving enough importance to done? And actually, don't we need a situation that says this is done in order to be able to constrain what we build and to be able to successfully deliver? So isn't constraint good?
There are, again, I'm sure many agree with me that there are so many projects started but never finished. So it actually is good to be very clear with the definition of done, at least in sort of to certain points.
Anyone else want to buy? I'll throw another one at you if you want, but you can go for it.
Yeah, you can throw another one because I agree with Sonja. Yeah.
You're not supposed to agree on everything.
Yeah.
But okay, let me think of another one. So hyper casual.
Yeah. Okay.
Isn't that the very definition of it has to be done?
I think, this is one of the genres where done, just the incredibly quick cycles in which you go through stuff. There's a speaker earlier today, Christian, where he's talking about prototype is 5 days. Then next 5 days, you're testing real time in the market. And then you have another 5 days to fix any issues. So you're talking about a life cycle of a game being 15 days. Like, this is crazy. Of course, something like definition of done, like there it is. You have 5 days. Go make a mechanic and put it out and see real players interact with it.
Yeah, so I think this is one of the problems with comparing games to traditional media. The type of game, I mean, you don't have to call it genres, but the types of games and game experiences are so vastly different, right? Like, it's not like, oh, so you have movies which are romantic comedies, which are an hour and a half, or you have like Marvel action thriller, which are like 3 hours or whatever. Like, the way you consume games could be a 30-minute experience, it could be a 100-hour experience, it could be thousands of hours, legitimately thousands of hours, not for any other reason. Which, so yeah, I think the
Skyrim
changes.
No Man's Sky. I'm over 600 hours in No Man's Sky.
Or any MOBA. Like, it's just 200 hours just to even get good.
That's the tutorial.
That's but that's it. I think that's the point. So maybe we need to shift our definitions, is what I would hypothesize at. What if actually done is not a question of success? What if it done is a question of moving on? And I think this is where the hyper-casual lesson is so exciting. What if it actually what we're talking about is the lean startup principles? If you haven't read that book, please do. The idea that we need to fail early and stop thinking about failure as a bad thing. Is that what done might mean, or do you want to challenge that back to me?
Challenge.
Go on then.
Yeah, I rather we actually think about the lifecycle management parts. Like, you know, depending on a genre, you have and should have an understanding of, like, you know, how many days or weeks or years you plan to develop the game. And that, you know, ties into, like, you know, what's the team? Do you have resources? Again, what's the genre? Like, does it make sense to invest in the game? So it's more about, like, you know, how do you manage the point from conversion? So when players actually, you know, convert to the game, start playing the game, to, you know, retention and in the end, like, sort of loyalty.
So are you saying that you think that it's not just a question of failure, it's a question of giving yourself enough space to understand what it is you've done?
Well, I think so, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of appetite for risk, right? Like, as we keep talking about these different genres, but even different games within a genre, you have to talk about, like, pipeline management. How often is your player base expecting updates, right? You know, if you want to compete with Fortnite, like, you better have a lot of content and be updating all the time. And also, yeah, good luck to you. But I mean, these are all things that you have to factor in very early. And I've seen it, I've experienced it, where you come onto a very nice IP and they're trying to, it's almost like being on a plane trying to configure the plane to continue flying. And it's not the best situation you want to be in. So with any type of foresight going into development, setting up kind of the frameworks for you to continue doing these updates, I think is really important. If this is kind of the game and business model you would want to go into. Now, if you're doing hyper casual or more indie, like a premium game, like a Monument Valley, where it's a great experience and it has an end. I mean, these are all things that you have to just consider when going into developing a game.
So I'm wondering whether that's kind of hinting at whether it. Sorry, microphone in my face. Am I actually hearing from you that it's not even a question of, like, the game? Maybe it's a question of your business and how your business operates. So if you're going to hyper casual, your systems, your definition of done is a life cycle across multiple games. Whereas something like a Farmville, the game itself has a life cycle, and essentially it's where we focus our attention. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, I mean, I would assume that Sonja wants Farmville to last 10 years, right? So
it has already lasted 10 years.
Yeah, the next Farmville, yes.
It was a good start, 10 years, yeah. So Sonja, I mean, is that? Do you recognise that idea that the kind of content you're working on now is a longevity in itself, whereas other game companies need to think differently?
Yeah, of course, yeah. So it's a decision. Like many, like, larger studios have a term for like these type of games that should last for years. We have a term called forever franchise, and Farmville is one of those. The first Farmville was released 10 years ago, and it's still running. We have been thinking of, taking it offline, but it has very strong fan base, so it's still going strong. But of course, yeah, it's a decision, and it should be done in the beginning. Otherwise, like it's impossible to scale from something, like let's start with hyper casual, but then maybe it evolves into something like sort of forever franchise. Well, that will not happen.
I think even a great example at Zynga is just look at CSR and CSR2 and the differences that they implemented on CSR. So in total openness, I worked on CSR and was at the studio for CSR2. And the amount of thought that went into the live ops and kind of the new age way of running a game, you can see the difference between these two games.
Yeah, no, I mean, actually, I remember when Stron was working with the team before they launched the first one. We were stuck in an airport one day, and he was arguing with Boss Alien guys about how it should look. And it's amazing, even then, how much has transitioned from, like you said, the live management process and the frequency and the support and the pipeline of that. It's a massive undertaking. But I think it's probably worth thinking about this. Something Sonja said made me really think something about PlayStation Home. So the reason I mentioned PlayStation Home is there are 4 Discord groups I've recently discovered, all trying to rebuild it. It was shut down in 2015. And there's about 1,000 people across these 4 Discord groups, all of which are highly technical, taking packet, data to try to recreate it by hand. This is, 4 years after it was closed down. So I'm wondering whether the lesson of that is that actually there's a relay race going on here. So I have the concept, I hand it over to the team then build it, the team then complete that build, I sign it off and it gets launched. I'm now handing that off to live ops teams to manage and maintain it, and if I've done my job right, this infrastructure is in place so that can be managed as an efficient process. But even those live ops people need to be able to have their own goals and targets and stuff. Is that what we're saying? Is it a relay race?
I don't know if I'd call it a relay race, but
Well, handover,
Yeah.
Pass the parcel.
Everyone, when games are a service, because at that point we realize that the only time they're done, by your definition, is when they're a ghost town, right? And no one is playing them, and therefore no one is developing them. But yeah, at that point, any team who gets it, right? Like usually, you're right. Back in the day, you had this idea of the product, and the product was in a physical disk, and the physical disk had to be shipped out. So now what you kind of need is more sort of self-discipline of when are we done with it. I think you touched on that a little bit, Patrick, like have that plan up front and be like, we will spend X months and X resources on this, and then we are done. So the next team that comes over, yeah, you're right, they'll totally have their own set of goals and set of what done means for them. And yeah, that's also a relatively new kind of phenomenon, right? Like where multiple teams could be taking over a game over the course of its life. And I think they all need to have their own definitions and their own goals. And the handover needs to be done in a very like you need to know who you're handing it over to if you care at all about that product at the point which you hand it over.
You do.
Which most people do.
Yeah.
Even when it doesn't make sense for them anymore.
So, I mean, do you see how much of the original team do you see staying on the project and moving with it to the live ops?
I think more and more it should be the majority of the team.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Just from... I've seen a lot of growing pains on some very good products where we have had this, like what we're calling a handoff, where someone is really good at kind of designing a great core loop, but they don't have live ops, in mind for it. So I mean, they make a great, beautiful, very fun game, but how is the product team going to sell this? How are they going to make any money, right? And so actually having a lot of people early in the process. I mean, this is kind of reminding me of like how waterfall works versus how like even lean startup, where it's just like, hey, everybody, Scrum team get together, and then it's just fast iterations. I think I personally would prefer more people up front, maybe not full-time working, but having a good a discussion and making sure that all the bases are covered, rather than, hey, as a designer or an artist, I have my bases covered. Now it's someone else's problem to figure out how to monetize this or how to fix retention.
So, Sonja, how do you avoid that somebody else's problem?
So, well, I'm not handing over anything.
It's mine!
So yeah, I have actually, I think, quite sort of different take on live ops than most of the others, and this is a successful way of running it. So, but the thinking is that I think too many teams start too late, and they forming another team to basically just maintain a game is maybe also not the wisest idea. So. I believe in just developing different models in order for like community managers, producers, PM to basically be able, by utilizing different templates and assets, to actually generate the challenges or events or whatever.
It sounds like you're talking about actually kind of thinking about repeatable processes.
Yes.
And using them. I mean, that's crazy talk, isn't it, in game development? Why would we want to have a system that actually works?
Fire from the head.
I'm from Finland. Processes.
I think there's very good reason why Finland's called the kind of home of mobile games, and I think in some ways, to a certain extent, large extent, the home of service games, arguably as well. But maybe I'm biased because I used to work with Sonja. Anyway, so the key thing is, for me, we have this. I think we've established that done is a relative thing, and it's relative to the experience that we're trying to create. I think we've established from that we can time box, we can have our own criteria for what done is for now, when done enough is, and how we then decide the next set of criteria. But at some point we're going to stop. How do we decide to stop? Sorry. You go.
Me first. So I think it's always, for the team, it's a question about basically like resources, either like money or developers. So if the team has other games they are working on or should be working on, or the game is not making money, so of course in order for the company to if now I'm talking more about like smaller studios, so of course it's always a decision, like if game A is not making money, so of course you need to shift the resources to something else.
Yeah, it's certainly just opportunity costs, and I think this always factors into older games where, okay, you're making maybe even just some money, but there's an entire team here that obviously has a good amount of experience. Could they go make another game and put these resources to something that could develop into another hit title or another game that is another revenue source? And so there's always the function of opportunity cost, really.
I think you absolutely do not try to make that decision at the time. I think you make it well in advance when everyone's still excited about the game and it's like, this is going to be great and whatever. But at what point do we stop, right? And you plan that out like 6 months in advance or a year in advance or whatever. Like, are there certain metrics that we would see where we'd be like, you know what, guys, this isn't working. Let's do something else. And when you set that plan down, you will 100% ignore it when it comes time, but it'll be like a guidepost. Right, it'll be like, guys, we are so far over what we had decided were our thresholds. Like, now we have to kill it or continue, right? Like, but then you at least have that map.
Yeah, I think that idea that we have these various stages, and at each stage we try to predefine what good looks like and what not good looks like. And if we kind of set in our goals what we are expecting to see, only if we do that in advance can we actually know what the results are, whether they are good or not. And of course we can adjust them and adapt to them, but essentially the more we can take the emotion out
Yeah.
of that
Trying
process.
to make that decision in the moment, that's very hard.
It's very hard. I think your point as well is the opportunity cost should form a key part of that. I think unless you've got a good reason for that experience to continue, but unfortunately, often it does come down to emotion. Often it comes down to politics beyond the studio. I mean, Home got shut down because they weren't really in a position where they could take it, I think, onto the next platform because there was too many dependencies on technology. Can't avoid that. That happens. It's sad for a lot of people, but you have to plan then to close it down. So we're running out of time, so quickly I'm just going to ask you, what's the one thing that you think the audience should take with them on this concept of like when a game is done? What's the one lesson you think you should share?
Treat game design and business decisions as holistic and understand that this is part of the entire process.
Yeah, so game development is about like loving your product, but then again, you need to have clear criteria when to move on.
Yes. What everyone's said, it's really making games is fun and you love it. It's why we're all here. But there is the business side to it. There's a lot of planning, a lot of just organization that goes behind this, and kind of even just using like the scientific method of testing stuff. Try and like have hypotheses about, what is good, what is bad. When do you say that this is done? We should move on to another project. Just lots of planning and just trying to have that foresight and understand what you're trying to build and who you're trying to build it for.
For me, I often get called in to try and rescue games. And so in some ways, I'm the worst person because I don't want to close down the game because I get paid to fix it. So I have to have some criteria where I can start being honest with myself that this is done. And it's hard, and I need an external person to tell me, and I need them to make me say, this is what I expected the result to be, this is the result we got, it didn't make it, shut it down. And sometimes it's the hardest thing to do, but sometimes it's the best thing ever. And you can see the relief on the eyes of the clients when they realized they've come to the end of that journey, and now they can get started on the thing they really want to do next with all of the lessons they got out of that process. That to me is the key thing. And on that note, thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.